Fantastic. Let's go shopping.
Coming to you on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, debate, and discussion at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wren. I am joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Moore.
Hello.
And Daniel Wolfsong.
Hey there.
And on deck today, we have some Gaytheist Bible study, some fun with Conservapedia, and we're going to talk to the Herd Mentality's Adam Reakes about his two gay dads. So let's go ahead and get started with some Gaytheist Bible study. Daniel, what's our topic for today, sir?
Okay, today we're talking about everyone's favorite verse about gay folks, Leviticus 20:13, which says, "If a man has sexual relations with a man, as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their heads."
Yeah.
Dun, dun,
Well.
dun.
I, being Jewish, have strong feelings about this.
Preach it. Let's hear it. What do you got?
Okay. Number one, the word that translate, and I forget the exact Hebrew word, but the word in Hebrew that translates as everyone's favorite word, well, this one actually says detestable, but the King James Version says abomination. And that word that translates detestable or abomination is actually, the Hebrew word is actually closer to our word taboo than what the word abomination usually means, or detestable.
Well, and I've heard that in reference to other verses in the Bible that generally are thrown out as saying that the Bible is against homosexuality, and saying that it's not so much a moral prescription against it as in just pointing out that it's a taboo and that it's something that kind of wasn't done during that time.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is Leviticus has a lot to do with things that were specifically prescribed for the Hebrew people to do, because they were a special. They were God's chosen people. They were Yahweh's chosen people. They had a covenant with Him, so they had to do certain things to set them apart, make them separate from the pagans that surround them, the Canaanites, the Philistines, everyone else. And the word that's usually translated as holy, kadosh, is a Hebrew word that literally means separate or set apart. And so things that they did, they were doing more in reference to Canaanite ritualistic pagan sect practices that were more religious practices than actual sexual desires. So that's my little rant on that.
And Daniel, another thing that strikes me about this verse is how it calls out specifically if a man has sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That seems pretty specific to men and not really prescriptive for women.
Yeah, so a lot of verses in the Bible that seem to be condemning homosexuality tend to focus more on men than with women. Not all of them, the vast majority of them at least. And here we have...
because lesbians are hot, right?
Well, because there's nothing worse than being a woman. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
At least according to these biblical authors. Because women having sex with other women apparently is not as bad as men having sex with men, because men having sex with men makes at least one of the men like a woman. And that's just not good.
Yeah, and that seems to kind of... I kind of have this overarching theory of bigotry and homophobia and transphobia, that it's kind of all gender-based when you get right down to it. That's why so many people who are openly bigoted about homosexuality will be like, yeah, but I still think lesbians are hot. Because women, they seem to see women already on this lower pedestal, and what gay men are doing, at least one of them, like you said, is kind of lowering themselves to that level of being a woman, or at least woman-like, or taking on a traditionally female role in sex.
Right, being receptive, taking the receptive role in sex. And what you just mentioned is a really interesting sort of bit of our cultural narrative, because people who are overtly homophobic will admit lesbian porn is hot, or watching two women kiss is hot, watching two men kiss is gross. And ultimately, this is all rooted in misogyny, because you have, on one hand, two men together. That's disgusting because one of them is like a woman, and men should be dominating women, not dominating other men, because men should never be put in a position where they're made like a woman. On the other hand, when you have two women together, well, women are sex objects. When you have two of them together, that's just doubling your pleasure. So that's fine. Looking at this text from, in its cultural perspective, the ancient Hebrews were a very misogynistic and homophobic culture. That's something that we have to keep in mind.
Sure.
And it's no wonder that we're going to see a lot of that homophobia and misogyny and transphobia even in some verses.
Well, and one thing that always strikes me about this, when you have more progressive Christians and you point to this in the Old Testament and say, well, how do you explain this? And typically the response has something to do with the Old Testament is the Old Covenant, the old law doesn't apply anymore, or the old law has been fulfilled. Christ came to fulfill that law. Mm-hmm. And my response is always, so, if I had been born at the wrong time, then it would have been, in fact, biblically legal to kill me. And, if you and I were alive at that time, you would still have to admit that that was the prescribed punishment for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly.
And I've never gotten a satisfactory answer to that.
I have heard one. It's the answer I've heard to that is that humanity, it has to grow up just like a person grows up. So you have different rules for a small child than you would for a teenager, as you would for a young adult or an older adult. And that's the excuse I heard, but I still think it's a bad one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Me too. And I guess when I say I've never heard an answer to that, I should clarify and say that I've never heard a satisfactory answer to that.
Right.
Because I've heard people say stuff along those lines, and I've also heard people say, just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, "Well, it's God's universe, not mine."
Yep.
Oh wow, that's just
yeah.
like the ultimate cop out. That's just the ultimate. I don't care. I don't have time.
God, he works in mysterious ways.
The problem, even with the progressive faith communities saying that the Old Testament doesn't matter, the problem is these sentiments, these homophobic ideas, these misogynistic ideas, they echo into our culture today, and they
very
matter
loudly, very loudly.
And I would argue that the majority of the homophobia that we experience in our culture today, just in the United States, is a direct result of the echoes of homophobia from biblical times that have been carried over through Christianity into our modern time. And even if these progressive faith communities are saying, well, it doesn't matter, the fact is it still matters. It's still happening.
There's another secular media network podcast called Secular Sexuality. It's Daryl Ray's podcast. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is how even when people come out of religion, their attitudes about sex and sexuality and gender still so much come from that religious teaching that they think they've left behind.
Oh, yeah.
And when you talk about, because I'm sure we've all experienced homophobia even within the atheist community, and they try and justify it in terms of, well, two men and two women can't reproduce, so it's got to be wrong. It's wrong on a scientific level. It's unnatural in that way. And I just have to think that that just has to be a holdover from either a religious upbringing or the echo of their parents' religious upbringing. And, maybe it's just straight up innocent ignorance. I don't know. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure it's more complex than just one factor or another, but I think that's something that everyone should be aware of. I mean, if you had a religious upbringing, leaving all of that behind, especially when it comes to attitudes surrounding sexuality.
Yeah, and I've taken part in debates with people who have come at me with it's not natural, men and men can't reproduce, women and women can't reproduce. And that argument is very easily dismantled. First of all, homosexuality is not unique to the human race. It happens in nature.
Yep.
Second of all, The whole reason that any of us are here is because of diversity. Our planet is richly diverse, and it's diverse sexually as well. There's no worry of the planet, of the human race dying out because suddenly everyone's being born gay. That's not going to happen. So that's not something that we have to worry about. So.
Well, and my favorite terse response to that argument is when straight people stop making kids that they don't want, gay people will stop being parents.
Zingo.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, they don't tell sterile people that they can't get married, so,
I have heard literally one Christian say that.
Wow.
Right.
Oh, the intellectually honest one.
Right, exactly. So that's going to do it for Leviticus 2013 and this edition of Gaytheist Bible Study. When you come back, we're going to learn why we at the show here are all such a bunch of fatties. More of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network after this.
We are given one life, full of billions of small and large decisions. To be somebody, to change, to be kind, to give hope, to become a better person, and to leave a lasting impact on this planet. It is a decision to be made every single day while your heart is still beating. We've made our decision. Absence of clothing. Atheist and science-based apparel and merchandise, donating 50% of our profits to charity. Look good and feel good, without God. Check us out at absenceofclothing.com and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. So, in the last episode, we introduced you to the joys of Conservapedia. This time around, we're going to continue that fun and look at all the reasons us atheists and LGBT folks are a bunch of fatties. That's right, kids. There are Conservapedia articles entitled Atheism and Obesity and Homosexuality and Obesity. If there is a better example of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy at work, I'm not sure I have ever seen it. So I'm just going to open the floor, gentlemen. What do you got for me? What are you thinking here?
Well, apparently they really hate Stephen Fry. Like, he's the poster child for fat atheist homosexual.
Right. We talked about that in the last episode with his freaking birthday cake.
Yes, which is the first image in the homosexuality and obesity.
Well, here's another good one. In the atheism and obesity page, there is a picture of a hand reaching into a refrigerator with some cream cookies, and the caption, yeah, exactly,
yummy.
And the caption is, obesity is positively associated with impulsiveness, lower self-discipline, and neuroticism, which are obviously all correlated with atheism.
Yep.
Just the idea that they're trying to paint obesity as something that's an atheist problem it's kind of mystifying to me, because I've been in many Baptist churches.
Yeah. What do they call them? Carrion suppers?
There are potlucks. Those people like to eat, and I don't blame them. I love to eat.
I love to eat too, and
you can't have sex or drink, so you got to do something.
I loved to eat before I was atheist too, so that was not a new development.
And I lived in Utah, and I went to some Mormon functions, and Mormons know how to eat, son. Oh my goodness! Have you ever had funeral potatoes?
No,
that's just looking at them. Oh, they're delicious.
Well, I guess so. Maybe atheism and obesity is a thing, guys. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, apparently, according to the Atheism and Obesity page, a 2010 study reported in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion,
which is very obviously a well-respected, peer-reviewed journal of science. It's like I just want to set that out ahead of time.
Well, it does have scientific in the name, so clearly
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
they adhere to all the rigors of scientific study. So, so
do Scientologists.
Well, they found that for Korean women living in California, religion, quote, may help prevent obesity. What? What does that even mean?
Why are they selling this on like TV infomercials? Like,
I bet there are late night infomercials. Like, do you have 10 pounds to lose, brothers and sisters?
Well, see, another thing about this that strikes me as funny, and when I say funny, I mean the kind of funny that makes you cry at night, not the kind of funny that makes you laugh.
Right.
Is that when it comes to conservatives, especially religious conservatives, there seems to be this tone of you're bad, and you should feel bad. And so, on top of the atheism and the homosexuality, there's also this whole fat shaming section that they seem to be really, really proud of. And yeah, that's not a good thing either, guys.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about. Where both of these articles are just an absolute exercise in the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. It is just taking all of these correlations. Like, I mean, you have absolutely no way to demonstrate a causal link between these two things. And I mean, I feel like even making that argument is giving this crap more legitimacy than it deserves.
True.
Yeah.
But it just, I mean, it hurts. Like, the stupid hurts, guys.
And then there's some other articles like millennials, irreligion, and obesity, because apparently those lazy millennials, kids these days, so.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's some use in these studies when linking environmental factors and things like that to obesity. Fine. Linking atheism with obesity, linking homosexuality with obesity, all that's doing in my mind is just saying this is a bad thing and this is another bad thing. They must be linked because in their mind, correlation always equals causation.
Well, right. I mean, that's just, it's the same argument. Atheism is bad because Hitler, even though Hitler was an atheist.
He was a Catholic?
Right, exactly.
And another article that they link in the links is Godless Britain and Alcoholism. So apparently, being atheist in England causes you to drink.
Well, there's a good subheading in the atheism and obesity article. Mm-hmm. See also atheism and gluttony, atheism and hedonism, and Jesus Christ, the Apostles, and the Mediterranean diet.
Oh wow!
Wow, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean that's one we're gonna have to go through. Oh, here's a great one. The Bible declares that gluttony and sloth are sins. On the other hand, atheists engage in denialism concerning the existence of sin and indicate that sin does not exist. For example, atheist P.Z. Myers, who possesses excess body weight, denies the validity of the concept of original sin.
Pictures of P.Z. Myers with some of his young overweight fans.
Is that in there?
Yes.
Oh my God.
P.Z. Myers declared, I don't object to bestiality in a very limited set of specific conditions. What does that even have to do with obesity?
They just wanted to throw it in there because why not? I mean,
yeah,
they're on a roll. And I just really hate this idea that, well, because gluttony is forbidden in the Bible, therefore, Christians don't engage in it. So this is something that atheists do. No, that's not how it works. And Christians, well, at least the honest ones will tell you that the whole thing about being a Christian is that you still sin a lot, apparently. And I use the word sin with quotes around it, but you're forgiven. And that's the whole idea of it.
Yeah.
But the idea that they're somehow doing it less because they're Christians, that doesn't make sense to me.
Lord, forgive me and pass the butter.
Right.
It
says here a significant amount of leaders with have problems with being overweight. See also New Atheism's leadership problem with excess weight. Wow. Because of all the svelte evangelists.
I mean, I'm trying to think of myself like in the New Atheist. I mean, who like. I mean, Sam Harris is pretty skinny. Richard Dawkins is pretty skinny.
But they could have 6-pack abs. I'm just saying.
Oh, okay. So they're not cut, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Have you seen? I mean, we all love Richard Dawkins, right? But have you ever seen him with a shirt off? No. Why? Exactly.
Your logic is undeniable, my friend.
I'm just saying.
Well, I don't think it gets better than that. So we're gonna go ahead and take a break. More Gaytheist Manifesto coming up.
Here's an excerpt from Fear of Physics by Lawrence Krauss.
A physicist, an engineer, and a psychologist are called in as consultants to a dairy farm whose production has been below par. Each is given time to inspect the details of the operation before making a report. The first to be called is the engineer, who states,
"The size of the stalls for the cattle should be decreased. Efficiency could be improved if the cows were more closely packed, with a net allotment of 275 cubic feet per cow. Also, the diameter of the milking tubes should be increased by 4% to allow for a greater average flow rate during the milking periods."
The next report is the psychologist, who proposes the inside of the barn should be painted green. This is a more mellow color than brown and should help induce greater milk flow. Also, more trees should be planted in the fields to add diversity to the scenery for the cattle during grazing to reduce boredom. Finally, the physicist is called upon. He asks for a blackboard and then draws a circle. He begins.
"Assume the cow is a sphere."
This old joke, if not very funny, does illustrate how, at least metaphorically, physicists picture the world. The set of tools physicists have to describe nature is limited. Most of the modern theories you read about began life as simple models by physicists who didn't know how else to start to solve a problem. These simple little models are usually based on simpler little models, and so on, because the class of things that we do know how to solve exactly can be counted on the fingers of one, maybe two hands. For the most part, physicists follow the same guidelines that have helped keep Hollywood movie producers rich. If it works, exploit it. If it still works, copy it. I like the cow joke because it provides an allegory for thinking simply about the world, and it allows me to jump right into an idea that doesn't get written about too much, but that is essential for the everyday workings of science. Before doing anything else, abstract out all irrelevant details. There are two operatives here, abstract and irrelevant. Getting rid of irrelevant details is the first step in building any model of the world, and we do it subconsciously from the moment we are born. Doing it consciously is another matter. Overcoming the natural desire not to throw out unnecessary information is probably the hardest and most important part of learning physics. In addition, what may be irrelevant in a given situation is not universal, but depends in most cases on what interests you. This leads us to the second operative word, abstraction. Of all the abstract thinking required in physics, probably the most challenging lies in choosing how to approach a problem. The mere description of movement along a straight line, the first major development in modern physics, required enough abstraction that it largely eluded some pretty impressive intellects until Galileo.
Fear of Physics by Lawrence Krauss. Find this audiobook and many more at atheistaudiobooks.com. The facts you won't hear in church.
Adam Reakes is the host of the Herd Mentality podcast, which just happens to be one of my favorites. He was good enough to have a chat with me about his experience on a student exchange program where his host family was two gay dads. So here it is, my interview with Adam Reakes from the Herd Mentality. Adam Reakes, welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. How are you?
I am very well, sir, and you?
Couldn't be happier. We meet again.
Yes, for the third or fourth time now. We're basically best friends, right? At this point,
yeah,
I can say that.
I'll go with that. Yeah.
So, you did a student exchange trip. Is that? Am I understanding that right? That's what that was.
Yeah. When I was 17, I went on student exchange to France. It was with a company called AFS, American Field Service, a group who came together after the Second World War These were doctors and nurses who said that we don't want to see this happen again. The best way for it to not happen again is to open communication so we can better understand each other's points of view and send students, when they're young and impressionable, over to foreign countries to learn the language, learn the culture, understand a different perspective. And yeah, when I was 17, I flew over to France in a small town called Poitiers, about 80,000 people.
Very cool. And so your host family was two gay dads.
I had, yes, two host daddies, one of whom I refer to as Mum and the other as Dad, because there was one more flamboyant of the two.
Right.
And it was the best year of my life. I have just wonderful memories of the whole experience. It was really an eye-opener. I took away so much from it. I have a better appreciation of their perspective, how they would like to be treated. I came away having a new language as well. Not just having lived with a family, it was really experiencing an entire community. It was the best thing I ever did.
Wow, that's awesome. So when you went, you knew that you were going to be staying with two host fathers that were gay, right? You knew that going in?
Yeah, they don't drop you in the deep end. Typically, when you go on a student exchange with AFS, many of the students don't even know who the family is going to be until they arrive at the airport, because trying to find host families is harder than sending students, because it's a big commitment.
Sure.
You have to, the host family basically wears the costs, or the vast majority of the costs, for accommodating somebody, feeding them, clothing them, sending them to school, all of this sort of stuff. So it's not cheap to do. And often when you arrive at the destination, a host family might say, okay, look, we can take a host student, but we can only do it for 3 months. I was very fortunate in that about 6 months before I flew, my mother got a phone call, and it was from AFS, and she sort of sent my father and I outside to go and do some work in the garden while she spoke with them. And she was on the phone for about an hour, and then she came out, brought a cup of tea, we all sat down, and she said, Adam, fantastic news. No, I've got good news and interesting news. The good news is they found your host family, and Dad and I, our faces lit up. This is sort of unheard of stuff. And then she said, the interesting news is that they're two men. And Dad's face collapsed, and I just had the biggest smile because I had two younger sisters. They were pretty annoying. What's not to like? Double income, no kids, high disposable income. I get treated like a princess.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Did you have any sort of preconceptions, or, were you predisposed to, to think it was weird or not okay, or were you indifferent, or, how did that thought process go for you?
I was pretty indifferent. My dad, not so much. It took a little while for it to sort of process with him. He's a little bit more old school. I didn't know many gay people. I think in my whole year there was one student, one boy who was openly gay, or he didn't advertise it, but he didn't really hide it either. And as you come out of high school, a lot more stuff comes to light. One of my best friends turned out to be gay, or had been for years, and just it was never relevant. But going over, yeah, I did have preconceptions. I won't lie. To me, I'm straight. I've not had any inklings. It's just not in my fibre. But when I walked down the first morning, I didn't speak a word of French when I arrived. I got up in the morning, walked downstairs, and they're sitting around the table. Benoit's getting ready. Benoit's mum.
Gotcha.
Patrick is dad. And Mum would always get up in the morning earlier, make breakfast for everybody, and then we'd walk down, and they kissed on the lips. And the first morning I thought, oh, this is like a bus crash. I can't look away. It was
right.
It was very odd. But then after that, it was just the normal thing to do. The
right.
loving couple, it didn't mean anything to me. Never Never were their opinions put upon me in such a way that I felt uncomfortable, or it wasn't knowingly done. They didn't put me in any awkward positions, ever. This is just how they were, and this was my opportunity to have insight into another relationship.
So, I assume that, you participated in all kinds of activities with them. I mean, were they at all involved in the LGBT community there? Did you ever go to any sort of events like that, or was it just kind of, just you guys kind of thing?
No, they weren't sort of big in the gay scene in Poitiers. It was, Mum was a theatre director. Benoit was, he directed what's called a spectacle du Moyen Âge, a medieval spectacular. So they'd go and take this ancient castle, for example, and Benoit would script this. We'd probably have a couple of hundred people set up as archers. There'd be some people doing jousting. I was a juggler. That was the skill that I had. So I'd go and juggle and breathe fire. And that was useful because they wouldn't let me speak in front of a crowd, not with my French being as terrible as it was.
Of course.
And that was where the fun happened. And they took me to, within 3 months of me arriving there, it was coming into winter. So that was a shock in itself, coming from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere.
Right.
It actually gets cold at Christmas up there.
Right.
And we went to Switzerland, because normally down here we're having barbecues, eating prawns and shellfish and drinking
hate
beer.
You all.
Yeah, such a good time down here. You should try it sometime.
Oh, I plan to.
But that was my first winter Christmas, and it was bitterly cold. And Benoit said, "Let's make you a costume, and it's going to be fabulous." And he went.
That's awesome.
He went and bought this really thick, heavy material, and I was a 14th century sort of juggler. And he made me leather pouches for my juggling balls. He made me like a leather loop to put my fire clubs in, and this beautiful cape and hood that went over and the whole costume weighed about. It would have been about 10 kilos. I don't know what that is in pounds, but it was quite heavy. But in the middle of Switzerland, after being there for 3 months, we went over and partook in this amazing medieval event for the Swiss New Year, and it was filmed on top of a television studio that was built like a pyramid. So along the bottom, there were, all the children playing with Diablos and that sort of thing. Then you had the archers above it shooting fire arrows on the next tier. Then you had people on stilts on the third tier. And I was the only one who could juggle fire. So I was right at the top of this pyramid. But I didn't realise, as this was being broadcast live on Swiss TV, because I didn't speak French at the time, that they were going to cut the lights right on midnight for the fireworks. So I'm up there juggling away with my fire clubs, and then on TV, you just see these 3 fire clubs fall off to the second, third, fourth tier. Because I don't know how to juggle them in the dark.
Right.
You know which bit not to catch.
Right.
That's
well,
the
of
bit
course.
that you can see. And we were sort of billeted out with all the people in Switzerland. And yeah, everyone was very, very accepting of Mum and Dad.
So the people there in Switzerland, I mean, is the culture kind of the same there, or it was just kind of like, it was just kind of no big deal?
Yeah, no one cared. No one cared. At all. And there were plenty of other gay people there as well. I mean, theatre seems to be the place to go.
Right.
We travelled all around France, Switzerland, and every couple of months we'd be driving off to some obscure area to go and transform a medieval chateau for this huge spectacular. And every time I'd meet new people, never came up. Nobody cared. Everyone knew, nobody cared.
God, that's such a hard thing for me to wrap my head around, because, I mean, with me being trans, I'm bi, but I'm not in a relationship with anybody. So nobody really knows that about me. But, there's this constant battle over, gay rights and, the morality of it all and, equal rights for marriage and all that sort of stuff. It is so hard for me to wrap my head around the concept of like there being a place where no one cares. Like, I mean, outside of a specifically like, if I'm going to a queer event, like obviously it's no big deal to everyone there.
See, I recall Patrick and Benoit had been together for 20 years. So it wasn't a short-term relationship, and that was the reason that they were allowed to accommodate other students, because they'd been in such a long relationship, even though it was unconventional.
Right.
Patrick, when he was a teenager, he'd done a student exchange to the States, the US, so his English was quite good. But I recall asking them one day, what's the go with marriage? Can you get married? Gay marriage wasn't a thing. They had no interest in the church side of things, that aspect, because it meant nothing to them, having an authority figure give them consent or the go-ahead. But for tax purposes, and I'm pretty sure this is all over the show, all around the world, there are benefits for couples who are in a civil partnership. And when I was over there, this was being put to Parliament. It was being discussed. Do we allow civil partnerships for gay couples? And Patrick and Benoit had discussed it. I mean, it was in their best interest financially. If one of them were to pass away, the other one wouldn't have to pay inheritance tax or that sort of stuff. So for that reason alone, it's a good thing to have the ability for partners to formalise their relationship, because it's financial. I mean, it's the way the world goes round. And it's incredibly discriminatory for a straight couple to be able to pass on their affairs to another without loss. But, for another couple who's equally loving, have been in a partnership for just as long, to then have to go and pay a large portion of that to the state. It's not fair.
Yeah, there was, I can't think of the lady's name, but there was a lady, she'd been together with her partner for 15, 20 years, so a really long time. And, she ended up having to pay like $250,000 in estate taxes because she couldn't legally get married to her partner. And you hear stories like that all the time. I don't remember where I saw it, but I remember somebody saying that there are some places where you can jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get kind of the same legal benefits that marriage confers, but you have to spend weeks and weeks bouncing between offices and agencies, filling out paperwork and powers of attorney and all this sort of stuff that, to get something that you could simply get by signing a marriage certificate. And it boggles my mind how people don't understand that is, that's discrimination. It's textbook discrimination.
And we're still decades behind here over in Australia as well. Amusingly, our Prime Minister is a hardcore religious nutter, and his sister has been in a long-term gay relationship, and he's staunchly against equal rights for gay couples, gay marriage. He's really against it. When she was interviewed on it, she said, well, look, he loves me and accepts me for who I am, and that's all that matters. And I thought, well, you know what? You're in an interesting position where you've already lost out, and you're still continuing to support that bigotry, even though you're the victim.
Right.
So, it's just politics. How infuriating.
Yeah, that's something that we talk about in the trans community a lot, because people will say something along the lines of, well, I love you no matter what, but, that's a situation that I've run into with one member of my family. It's, well, I love you and I want you to be happy, but when it comes time to do anything to accommodate me in any way, as simple as even making the attempt at using my chosen name or using the right pronouns, even making the attempt, well, that's where I got to draw the line. So I'm sorry, you don't accept me. If you can't do that.
Might be time to get a new family, Callie.
Right. Well,
because I've known you as nothing but Kelly.
Right. Well, and luckily for me, she's the only one in my family that I've had that issue with. At least the only one that I cared to have a relationship with in the first place. We'll put it that way. Some of my uncles I haven't had conversations about, but we've never really been close, so I don't really care much what they think, anyways. The dissonance there is amazing to me. How people will say, "Oh, well, I love and accept you for who you are, but don't ever bring your boyfriend around. Don't ever bring your girlfriend around." Or, I don't want to see you wear a dress. Like, there's all these ridiculous conditions. Like, I love you as long as you're the person that I think you are, or the person that I want you to be. And it's amazing to me that people don't see how that's basically saying I love you, but only kinda.
Yeah, well, the word "but" in itself is a disqualifier.
Right. I'm not racist, but I'm not homophobic, but
it negates everything prior.
Yeah, exactly. At the very least, it tells you what the person's real point is, because the thing that comes afterwards is always the real point.
Yeah. Do you know that, just as a side note, having spent a year with Patrick and Benoit, it was about 10 and a half months, but I came out of it speaking French fluently. They'd had one American student prior to me, who I actually contacted before going over there to say, "Hey, is there anything I should keep an eye out for?" He said, "No, you'll have a great time." I thought, that's enough for me, let's go.
Right.
And they had a couple of students, they had one full-time student and a couple of really short-term stays after me as well. So they're basically my host siblings, although I've only met them maybe once
right.
on Skype or in person. Since, as I've subsequently gone back to France, they may have been there at the same time. So we're all pretty tight-knit. But Benoit and Patrick, about 3 years after I left, they split up. And it really hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like my real parents had split up. Because I just couldn't process it. Time heals all wounds, and it is what it is. I'm closer to Mum than I am to Dad. But it had the same impact on me that I think my birth parents would have if they were to split up.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I can't imagine, doing that because, new place, new language, new people, like never been there before. You have no idea maybe some idea what to expect. I took a trip to Europe when I was 14, and I spent 3 days with a host family in Germany. And of course, 3 days in a year are totally not the same thing. But it was almost a similar situation because the lady that we stayed with didn't speak English at all. And I think there was a miscommunication. Her husband spoke fluent English, but he was out of town the whole time we were there. So it was me and two of the other people there, and she ran a bed and breakfast. So we got to meet all kinds of people from the town. It was a little town in Germany called Koblenz, if you know where that is.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's I think it's close to Frankfurt, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was really interesting because she would say stuff in German, and I knew a couple of words of German. But it was interesting just kind of trying to figure all that out and navigate that. And that was interesting enough just for 3 days. I can't imagine, almost a year of it.
Mm. Yeah, there's so many different ways to communicate though. After the first 2 weeks I was there, they put their foot down and said, nope, no more English. You just got to speak French.
Wow.
And the first 3 months were extraordinarily difficult because the difference in the way we speak, we don't necessarily slur our words together in English. Each word stands alone. But in French, at the end of a word, it can blend into the next word. So the complete tone and rhythm of a sentence is upside down. It's completely foreign to me. And for the first 3 months, I just got my ear in tune if that makes any sense. Just to
Sure,
become
yeah,
accustomed to the flow. And then by 6 months, I was speaking pretty well. By 10 months, I was fluent, and people didn't know where I was from. Often they thought I was a native French speaker from, say, Canada, because they could tell I had an accent. But they didn't.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if people were able to pick out an accent.
Well, I speak slowly and clearly in French as well, and I'm often mistaken for those ruthless Teutonic Germans. But even when I went to Paris is a horrible place.
I went on my student ambassador trip, and I was, I wasn't super into the whole romantic thing, but I was like, oh, it'll be cool.
Yeah.
And and I remember, I forget what the first place they took us is, this big hill that overlooks all of Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a third of it that's really nice. That's all like the touristy places.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of it, is just not super impressive.
Probably Montmartre. But the further you get from any capital city, the nicer the people are. That's the theory I formed over
Gotcha.
many number of years traveling around the world. They would, when I would speak to somebody in French pretty fluently in Paris, they'd say, they'd just assume I was either American or English, and they hate both of those. So I worked out that if I apologized and said, excuse me, I'm Australian, can you tell me where XYZ is? Then all of a sudden they were buying me beers. Because Australia is so
hilarious.
far, it's so foreign for them, and the thought of spending 24 hours on an aeroplane to get here, they just can't process it. So for them, it's an unattainable goal. I'm the closest thing they'll ever come to meeting a kangaroo.
Oh, I'm going to have to remember that if and when I end up in Europe again. I'm just going to have to, you're going to have to teach me an Australian accent. And I'm just going to tell everyone that I'm Australian, and that's how I'm going to have a good time.
Worked for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. World travel advice. Well, Adam, I want to thank you a whole bunch for coming on the show, for talking about your experience, for what you do with your show, for just being awesome. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it so much.
That's very kind of you to say. And you, Callie, are about to appear for a second time on The Herd Mentality. Are you aware of this?
Which I am so excited. If I can fangirl for a second, I just want to say The Herd Mentality is one of my favorite podcasts. So,
well, there's a little bit of a teaser. If yours goes to air before mine does, Callie, you encountered Ray Comfort.
I did. Encountered is probably the perfect word to use for that situation as well.
It's pretty grisly. We'll leave we'll leave it up to the imagination of your listeners.
Yes. So The Herd Mentality, check it out.
Thanks for having me on, Callie.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And today's Be a Better Ally segment is brought to you by my friend and yours, Daniel Wolfsong. And he's going to talk to us about jokes.
So I wanted to talk today about gay jokes. And we've all been there. You're hanging out with some friends, or you're on Facebook, and someone makes a joke about gay people. And it's the kind of joke that definitely would not be funny to a gay person. So what do? Here's the thing. No one wants to be a buzzkill. It's way easier just to let the joke slide and go about your day. But being an ally means taking a stand, even if there aren't any gay folks around. So one thing I found really effective in situations like this is just to ask the person who made the joke, why is that funny? Or you can tell them flat out, making fun of gay people isn't funny. You don't have to belabor the point. Most of the time, when someone's making a joke like that, they're not even thinking about how it might feel to be a gay person hearing that. By taking a stand and pointing out the joke for what it is, and it's basically a small act of aggression toward gay people, you're letting them know that it's not okay. And you're letting everyone else in the room know that it's not okay. They might disagree with you. They might not. They might tell you to lighten up because it's just a joke. But you know what? Their response isn't on you. It's on them. So here's the thing about gay jokes when you're a gay person. They really suck. We already live in a world where we aren't treated as equals, and every gay person you'll ever meet, can tell you what it's like to experience bullying and social isolation just for being gay. The same thing goes for hearing someone say, "That's gay," when what they really mean is, "That's stupid." That happens to be really insulting when you're a gay person. And it doesn't matter if someone, quote, "didn't really mean it that way." What matters is that people are still saying it. And it's a phrase that needs to be retired. If you want to be a better ally, don't stand for it. Don't be afraid to call people out. Taking a stand when it's not easy to do is part of what being an ally is all about. And you know what? We really appreciate it.
This is fantastic because this is something that I think affects the LGBT community as a whole pretty universally. Because I've been in places where it's generally accepted that gay jokes aren't okay, but there's still a joke made out of, a man looking like a woman or a woman looking like a man.
Yep.
And that's a very aggressive thing for a trans person to see. And I think another thing that's important to call out about this is that so often when this happens, it's not meant to be malicious.
Right.
Because people don't know what, like you said, people who aren't gay, who aren't trans, who aren't somewhere on the queer or trans spectrum don't understand what it's like to actually be on the brunt of that.
Right.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Daniel was saying about, when people use gay in a manner, to mean stupid. I had a roommate that did that, and I just started using his first name to mean stupid, and he got really mad. And
yeah, and I'm sure he thought he was perfectly reasonable for being mad and couldn't understand why you were.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the one thing that I've read about this concept that really kind of crystallized it for me, and I feel like a terrible person because I can't remember her name, but so often when you bring up these conversations with people, people start talking about censorship and they're just words, blah blah blah, and
word policing.
Exactly. And what I always tell people is, I'm not trying to tell you that you need to censor yourself. What I'm trying to make you do is understand why this is wrong so you don't want to do it. It's not about me personally being offended. I mean, I hope that someone would care about that, especially if they claim to be an ally. But at the end of the day, it's not really about me and my hurt feelings.
Right.
It's about the culture that surrounds these things. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Ann Coulter says something stupid because every time she opens her mouth, she says something stupid.
Agreed. Yeah.
And the torrent of, "Oh, she's really a man" jokes. I mean, it just opens up.
Yes.
And I mean, I can't tell you how many arguments I've gotten into with people where they think it's all of a sudden okay to use a slur like that just because they don't agree with someone. And the example that I always use is, if a person of color makes you mad, does it all of a sudden become okay to throw racial slurs at them? Of course it doesn't.
Right.
And the same thing is for homophobic or transphobic language. It's plainly not acceptable.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the whole thing of, that people believe that we're making a choice of some kind, so that somehow makes it better. I choosing to prefer men and you're choosing to be a woman, things like that. So
yeah, among the people who do it maliciously, I absolutely agree with you that I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. Even people who are, people who claim to not be racist, and claim to not be homophobic, but they'll still tell you that, being gay is wrong and the races shouldn't mix, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Well, no one is ever racist or homophobic according to them.
Right. Of course.
I see this a lot among straight people, and it's funny because when a straight person makes a joke demeaning gay people, or makes a comment demeaning gay people, the gay community is very quick to rise up and come together and say, "Hey, that's not okay." But something that I see a lot in the gay world is joking making jokes about trans people and being malicious towards trans people. And guess what? Being an ally is a multifaceted term. Everyone decides what kind of ally they want to be. But you can't expect, as a gay person, you can't expect the world to be your ally when you're not willing to be an ally yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard sometimes for people like us who are part of groups that are traditionally marginalized to recognize that in some ways, some of us still have privilege of our own. You know, even being trans, I have a certain level of privilege in that I'm white and that I'm binary identified. Just the fact that I identify on the gender binary confers a certain level of privilege on me. And obviously the fact that I'm white. So while I'm very good at turning the discussion outward and saying, well, you need to recognize the privilege that you have and the position that you're in to be an ally. I always try and remind myself that when it comes to people who aren't binary identified, genderqueer folks, gender fluid folks, bigender, agender, third gender, that whole spectrum, it's incumbent upon me to be an ally to that community because in comparison to them, I have privilege.
Oh yeah, we've all got privilege, and where our privilege exists, blind spots exist. So we're until we set on that journey to explore our own privilege, they're going to continue to be blind spots. That's why I say, if you want to learn more about your own privilege, talk to people who don't have the privilege that you do. I am part of the gay community, but I have privilege as a white man, as a cisgender person, and
even as being a gay man, I think that confers some privilege over, being lesbian or trans just because of the attitudes people have.
So we can all do better to examine our own privilege and take a closer look at those blind spots. Talk to people. Reach out to people who aren't like you.
I agree, and to that end, I've solicited ideas for the Be a Better Ally segment, and I reached out to some non-binary identified folks that I know and asked them for contributions for the Be a Better Ally segment. So the next few episodes will be contributions from those folks. So I'm really excited about that.
That's cool. Awesome. Yeah.
And that is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. Before we go, I want to let you know, if you're hurting, if you're scared, if you feel like no one cares, like no one understands, there is a community out here that loves you and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you need someone to talk to, please reach out. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. That's GaytheistCallie.
I'm at Daniel Wolfsong, DanielWolfsong on Twitter.
And I'm at Nerdcub, NERDKUB on Twitter.
And you can follow the show at The Gaytheists. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. And last but not least, we are on Facebook at facebook.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. I want to thank my co-hosts, Daniel and Jonathan.
My pleasure.
As always.
Until next time, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network.
Keep it real, homegirl.